All right, thanks Brian for that, and just time to take a look, very quick look on what's happening on the dailies. This is what we have on the very front page of the Daily Nation. Bishops fault Ruto on taxes, state jobs. They say lighten the tax yoke. The Anglican Church yesterday joined workers' union and politicians in rejecting proposals that seeks to increase the tax burden on Kenyans, accusing President William Ruto of being insensitive to people's sufferings amid the high cost of living. The bishops also questioned the criteria followed in making new public appointments. This is a story you can get on the fourth page of the Daily Nation. It is all about the issue of taxes, and that's the Finance Bill 2023. Police dig up 11 more bodies from Shakahola mass graves. That's what's on the second page of the Daily Nation, where the second phase of the Shakahola forest exhumations began on Tuesday this week. According to the probe, some of the victims were strangled, suffocated and bludgeoned to death. And police have rescued also 2 people in Shakahola forest yesterday during that ongoing search and rescue operation. And another 11 bodies were dug up on the second day of the phase of the exhumation exercise. And also with the same, we do know that police believe most of the bodies belong to followers of Pastor Paul Mackenzie's church in Shakahola village, who is accused of ordering them to starve to death to meet Jesus, is what they say. All right, we're going to move forward, so you can get that report on the second page of the Daily Nation. A new job, this is a third page. A new job, a party and 40 days missing. It's a probe. On Monday, 15 workers at a club were arraigned over Emmanuel's disappearance after their arrest last Friday. It's a story about a young man who was found dead after 4 years of studying for a degree in business administration, the Cooperative University, and graduating in 2022. Emmanuel Omondi's hard work finally paid off in March 2023 when he received an acceptance letter from a telecommunications company. But a night out with his friends to celebrate his new job would dampen the euphoria after he went missing at 2 a.m. on the 1st of April at a club in Ongata, Rongai. Friends say, let me get this correctly. Friends say trouble started between Emmanuel and other patrons after he accidentally fell and spilled drinks on the next table. A scuffle ensued and the bouncers escorted him out of the club. That was the last time his friends say they saw him. All right, that is what we have so far, and you can get that full report. The Emmanuel's family insists that the body was not their son's, is a body that was found, and that they believe he was still alive. However, police officers from Rongai, led by Sub-County Police Commander Hassan Chura, who have been handling the case, insisted the family must have permission for a DNA test to be conducted on them and the body to establish whether it is or not Emmanuel's body. So it's an intriguing case that you can read on the Daily Nation. Let me get to the 5th page of the Daily Nation. What else do we have? Okay, so that's what we had on the first page. This is what you can read in terms of what the clergy had to say. And also, AG, tough rules for churches on the way, as the government, which has moved to tame the proliferation of questionable religious institutions with a proposed law that will introduce tough guidelines on the registration and operation of churches. You can see there you have Attorney General Justin Muturi, who told senators yesterday that he has drafted a bill that will lay down strict rules for the operation of religious institutions, saying the current legislation was ripe for review. The association's bill, which is currently being vetted by the Attorney General's office before being introduced in Parliament, proposes, among other things, the formation of a corporate governance body for associations, and you can find that full report there as well. The Registrar of Societies says Ezekiel's and Mackenzie's churches have also been issued with closure notice. All right, moving forward, team agrees to conclude bipartisan talks in 60 days. That's what's happening in the political space. The 14-member bipartisan committee yesterday announced that talks would be concluded within 60 days, with urgent issues completed within a month. Announcing the agreement yesterday, committee co-chair and Rarieda MP Otiende Omolo said the members have also agreed and finalized on the framework to guide those particular talks. Kenya Kwanza leaders also say the Azimio counterparts are issuing demands to impede talks. So there's a bit of counter accusation on this matter. So it's a wait and see to see how that is going to pan out as well. You can get that full report on page 6 of the Daily Nation. And moving forward, state in plan to spend 1.14 billion on Nairobi BRT. This is a decongestion project which the government aims to ease flow of traffic into and out of the capital, and the state has allocated 1.14 billion to finance the implementation of the Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project in the financial year starting July, and the national government will provide 1 billion while the balance will be footed through foreign financing. That's what the National Treasury said in its expenditure plan for the new fiscal year. So what does this mean? This will mark the second consecutive budget cycle where the project has been allocated substantial amounts. In the current financial year, the BRT project was allocated 1.17 billion, a significant increase from the previous financial year's 700 million. Now, this project seeks to help decongest traffic within Nairobi and its environs. It will have dedicated lanes and is being constructed by Stakeholder Corporation, previously known as Sino Hydro. So you can get this full report as well on these plans by the state. However, work to complete constructions of the stations along Thika Road appears to have stopped at this point. We'll have to follow up on that as well. Just a little bit aside from that story, 24 million shillings set aside for Kibaki Mausoleum construction. The National Treasury has also allocated 24 million for the construction of a mausoleum for former President Mwai Kibaki, according to the disclosures by the budget. Remember, the former president died on the 22nd of April last year at 90 years and was buried on the 30th of April at his Othaya home. He was accorded a state burial with military honors. This mausoleum expenditure is covered in the approved budget estimates for the current 2022-2023 financial year. Okay, moving forward, we see this is still under national news. Our daughter was shot dead like a criminal. Achieng's parents lament. That's for parents of Jacinta Achieng. That's a secondary school student who was shot dead in Kisumu on Tuesday. The police killed her as if she was a hardcore criminal. That's what the parents of Jacinta Achieng had to say, struggling to come to terms with the tragic loss of their 19-year-old daughter. You have Dominic Achieng and his wife Evelyn Akinyi were still seeking answers to numerous questions. Achieng was killed by a stray bullet on Tuesday morning when on a motorcycle as she was going shopping for school supplies. She was among 4 people shot when police opened fire on that hostile crowd in Kisumu's Juakali area. And it's a story we are also following up here on NTV. Also, Boda death trap leaves jobless youths in the grip of despair. What promised to be the way out of poverty for thousands of jobless youth has instead turned out to be their bane as they struggle to repay loans they took to buy motorcycles to join the Boda business. It's quite a tough time, especially with the economy. And there is, however, a lawmaker who has tabled a motion in the House. You can read about that particular regulation there. It's on 8th page of the Daily Nation. And let's see what else we have. Okay, let's move forward from that. Just lastly, let me touch on this last story here on the Daily Nation. We see what else we have on the other papers. Broke NHIF hearts patients as hospitals decline cards. Well, there seems to be confusion between the National Health Insurance Fund and private hospitals, which has led to critically ill patients being denied treatment, Nation has learnt. Fearing reprisals, most of the hospital managers who spoke to Nation requested anonymity because the system may end up not paying their claims. They said patients, especially those with chronic illnesses, have been turned away from hospitals. Most of them depend on NHIF for their treatment. Hospitals have declared that patients with NHIF cards will not be served until further notice and until they receive a substantial amount of money from the government agency. This is quite a big story because hospital managers say NHIF owes them 12 million shillings, a figure that has been accumulating since last year. Some of the hospitals affected are those that have signed a comprehensive cover agreement with the fund, allowing patients to receive treatment without paying a single cent to healthcare providers. Now, you can imagine what that means for all those people who depend on this particular medical cover and the situation that is now unraveling. We'll be trying to follow up on this particular report as well. Let's see what we have on the Business Daily. And there you have it. This is what we have on the front page of Business Daily. Ruto to spend 100 billion on new trains, SGR revamp. President William Ruto's administration has stepped up expenditure on the Nairobi-Mombasa standard gauge railway with a plan to hit 100 billion in the next 3 years to revamp the line, build new slidings and buy more locomotives and cargo wagons. A report by the National Treasury shows that Transport Ministry under Kipchumba Murkomen as the Cabinet Secretary will receive additional 97.7 billion for what is known as the development of standard gauge railway. That's going to be between July this year and June of 2026. So this actually reverses a trend where the previous government had cut allocation to the SGR and will push the spending related to this particular line. So that's a story you can get on the Business Daily. And just adjacent to that story, still on the front page, the A to Z of the 2023 Finance Bill. You really want to understand what the Finance Bill is talking about? So it seeks to amend various laws relating to taxes and duties with the goal of increasing government revenue from taxes collected. And there's an outline of the key changes proposed in the bill, which is currently under consideration in the National Assembly. You can get that whole, explanation on the Business Daily on page 4 in terms of what we expect in the economy. Cooperative Bank boss pockets 287.5 million bonus, and mobile money agents post fast drop in quarterly cash. And also, just very quickly, banks sued to fight 15% tax on hedging deals. This is still on the issue of taxation, where commercial banks are now moved to court to stop regulations requiring them to pay 15% withholding tax on trading gains made from hedging contracts, opening a new battlefront with the tax man. On Taifa Leo, this is what we have on the front page. Maaskofu waamka. Viongozi wa kidini wajitokeza na kukosoa serikali kuhusu teuzi zenye upendeleo, gharama ya juu ya maisha. So what are they saying? Malalamishi ni kuwa wakuu wa makanisa mbalimbali nchini ambao wamekuwa kimya, raia wakilalamika kuhusu sera za Kenya Kwanza, wamevunja kimya chao na kutaka serikali kurekebisha na kubadilisha msimamo. You can get that full report on the second page of Taifa Leo. And also just down there, Yesu wa Tongaren ahojiwa na DCI alivyolipata jina lake. So that would be quite an interesting read. It's on the third page of Taifa Leo. And kimataifa, just adjacent to that as well, alikuwa rais wa Amerika Donald Trump aagizwa kumlipa mwanahabari shilingi milioni 411 kwa kumdhulumu kingono. 8th page of the Taifa Leo newspaper. All right, and finally, just on the East African, what do we have? It was our issue that ran from when was this? May 6th. It will run up to the May 12th. So that's our publication of the East African newspaper. China takes over ECOP funding. Stanchart walked back on a 5 billion funding deal over project pollution concerns, leaving Beijing to pick up the tab of the Uganda-Tanzania cross-border investment. Page 5 of the East African. Visits by world leaders expose Ruto's rising star on the globe. And also, over 300 deaths reported in DRC, Rwanda floods. We'll be having a conversation on that, really, to understand what that means for a country that is also battling one of its biggest conflicts yet. So what does it mean in the humanitarian situation in DRC? Okay, what else do we have? Just very quickly on the East African. Minister killing sparks talk on security agents' welfare. You can get that report there. What else do we have? let me see, Dar fights for legality to relocate Maasai in the face of fresh protests. Fourth page of the East African. I guess we can wind up there on those particular papers, but let me see what we have on the front page of the Standard before I move forward. And this is what we have on front page of the Standard. How Kalonzo goof cost him the presidency. This is still on what they followed up, a series of the book by the Defense Cabinet Secretary Aden Duale. For the record, they're saying the book reveals that Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto offered Kalonzo the presidency because a coalition of the three would have easily beaten Raila Odinga in 2013. But Musyoka's statements on ICC arced the duo, who quickly changed their minds. So you can get that full splash on 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the Standard newspaper. All right, so time to just move forward and talk about what we need to have a conversation on this morning, and it's all about the situation in DRC. What is the conflict all about? We want to get to the basics and try and understand what the situation is about and what really are some of the solutions on the table. And in studio, I do have a guest. We'll also be joined by another guest from Uganda virtually. And in studio, I am with Dr. Nicodemus Minde, Senior Lecturer, International Relations from the USIU Africa. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
And also, I hope Professor Israel Kodiaga can be able to hear me from Uganda. He's the Director General for African Affairs at Global Unification International. A very good morning, Prof. Good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Indeed, good morning. Good to see you. Indeed. And of course, we'll also be joined by Wilfred Muliro, who's a diplomacy and security expert in a moment, is yet to arrive. But what we do have we're hoping to try and understand is just try and get to the basics of what the situation in DRC really means, not just for the region, but also in Africa. And I'm going to begin with you, Dr. Nicodemus. Give us a sense of really how DRC found itself in the position that it finds itself today.
Well, for contextual purposes, the conflict in the eastern part of the DRC is as a result of the long history post-1994 genocide in Rwanda, where we saw a spillover of remnants of the perpetrators of the genocide who went and fled to the eastern part of DRC. And it is from then on we saw a series of conflicts in what scholars have called the Great Wars of Africa, First Congo War, Second Congo War, and all this has culminated in the formation of so many rebel groups in that eastern part of DRC. It is estimated around 120 rebel groups operate in that particular region. And it is these rebel groups that have actually been causing havoc. And of course, this has had regional implications, as you can tell, because of, you know, this Great Lakes region has countries such as Rwanda, Burundi, you know, DRC itself, Kenya, Uganda. And all this also has a lot of regional implication in terms of the power play, the interest of the group. And this has almost caused instability and destabilized the region. So we have actors within the region who are interested in the conflict because of what is happening there. We know of the M23 rebel group, which the East African Community Regional Force is aiming at, you know, fighting or negotiating.
Right. And
all this actually brings to fold what I call the regional power play in terms of interests around Rwanda, Uganda, DRC itself, Tanzania, and all the way even to Ethiopia, Eritrea.
Right.
So this is actually the genesis of the instability in the eastern part of DRC. Of course, we also have external powers, big powers like, you know, the United Kingdom, America, Russia, and all these great powers also have some sort of interest in that particular region.
And we'll try and understand really, you know, those interests. How do they affect the peace process in DRC. But Dr. Israel, before we take a break, from where you sit, you've done a lot of research with regards to the conflict in DRC. I believe you're in Uganda for something as, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but you can correct me, almost related to what is happening there. Maybe just give us an idea of some of the research that you've done on the situation there from your perspective.
Thank you very much. You are right. That's exactly why I'm here. And it is true that this group, the M23, dates back to 1994 genocide in Rwanda. And of course, we know that the conflict in Kivu has displaced over 100,000 people. And within the last 1 year, about 800,000 have fled their homes. This is according to the UNHCR official data. Now, both the DRC government, the UN, and even the East African forces accuse Rwanda of backing the rebels. That is basically the position. And research has revealed that 75% of the M23 are actually part of RPF, which is the Rwanda Patriotic Front. 15% you can say are those who are once in the DRC force but ran back to the M23, and only about 5% are the Banyamulenge. So in essence, when you look at this thing, it goes beyond 1994. It includes even issues like the Tutsi legendary dominance in the region, where they believe that they occupied a very big area, which has since been taken partly by Uganda, partly by Tanzania, Burundi, and the rest. So it is almost like they want to establish their old kingdom. It's an imperial mind. It's an imperial mindset, which sadly is supported by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, although publicly does not admit it. But when you look at the composition of M23, you look at the weapons.
The position, if you can hear me, the position of Rwanda is that they have, continuously to deny that they have any involvement with M23.
Thank you. Denial is the name of the game in this thing, but there is evidence to the contrary. For one, you will notice that the weaponry that they have, the Kevlar jackets that they use, the backpacks, the rocket-propelled grenades, these are all identical to what the Rwandan army sports when it goes into battle. So the first question will be, where do they get them from? So in a word, for those of us who have dug deep into this thing, the M23 is just a branch of the Rwandan army. And this has been confirmed by even Michel Aron, a British journalist who wrote focusing on the Great Lakes region and investigated a lot on this thing. So yes, Rwanda denies, and you realize as on March 1st news conference in Kigali, Paul Kagame accused his critics of ignoring history. And he said that people want a shortcut, blame it all on Rwanda, that in Congo there are over 100 armed groups, of which M23 is only one of them. But he did not say, he did not point out as to who is behind M23, and that is the point we are talking about.
All right. Prof, I think at that point we just have to take a very quick breather here on AM Live. When we come back, we'll get into the meat of the conversation and move forward from there. So talk to us. The hashtag we're using this morning is AM Live NTV. I am with Professor Israel Kodiaga, who's talking to us from Uganda. He's the Director General for African Affairs at the Global Unification International, as well as in studio I am with Dr. Nicodemus Minde, Senior Lecturer, International Relations at the USIU Africa. Talk to us at Zainab Ismail at NTV Kenya. We're going to be back in a short while. It's all about regional conflict and security.
Shauri gani? Kwani wewe abani kiwa na experience ya kupiga simu? Siku yako ya kwanza ya kupiga simu, abani harakisha mimi. Sisi ni watu wanapenda kupeleka bole bole bahali yake. Unafikiria mimi kutoka Wajir kutembea mpaka kuenda Isli mguu na bado nasukuma garmia ni kitu ya dakika mbili? Huwa beshanti mimi atashika simu. Bana kasirisha mimi nakuwaga mtu mbole sana.
To get Waria, dial star 811 star 933 hash. Skiza, Nation.
Okay, gosh, it is so small. We thought that it was a colobus monkey, but it's actually a bush baby. So, Eric, what exactly happened to it?
There is no doubt PSG will undergo major changes in the summer, a situation made clear by the club's decision to ban Lionel Messi for 2 weeks. Facing a season on the bench at Barcelona in a backup role, a move to Chelsea seemed like a good one for Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. Except, it has turned out to be anything other than good for the striker. Again moved into the shadows and now preparing to do what he can to leave Chelsea.
Looking for learning material that is tailored to your needs? Look no further than the New High Schooler magazine. As the ultimate guide for junior, secondary and high school students, the New High Schooler magazine is packed with premium content on a wide range of topics including careers, literature, finance and much more. With this magazine, you'll have access to valuable information that can help you make informed decisions about your future. So why wait? Subscribe to the New High Schooler today.
Hata Wajakoya alikuwa na lookalike before the elections, but immediately after kulienda vile ilienda, huyo lookalike alianza kutafuta job ya kufanana na Rick Ross.
And you see, in aviation we don't have room for errors. So if I am saying alpha, it has to be alpha.
Inamaanisha kwa aviation, A for apple you leave at the door.
A for apple, yes.
Ndege ni yako lakini airspace sio yako.
Hata kama nitainuka tu juu ya nyumba kidogo, like
hiyo ni airspace yetu.
If you can see traffic,
yes,
like
yes.
You can't be on the plane like, only see Saimo, as in.
No, the thing is, no, from a pilot perspective,
yes.
We don't like seeing other planes.
All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching AM Live as we try and understand the situation that is happening in DR Congo. And I want us to take a look at what has quite recently happened. Just I think that was on Tuesday. It's a statement that was made by President Felix Tshisekedi, who now sort of gave a warning to the East African Community Regional Force. And what he says is, this force will have to leave by June if they're not effective on the ground. In fact, he went on to accuse ACRAF of what he called cohabiting with rebels after the regional troops declined to enter combat. I want to understand now, with this situation in play at this point, and we'll come back to the SADC, which are now going to deploy their troops as well. Where does this leave the East African Community Regional Force? And is this, Dr. Nicodemus, a harsh assessment by the Congolese president?
Well, you might say it's a harsh assessment, but him directly saying that that ICRAF is cohabiting with the rebels, I think he should not be saying this as a head of state, and these are statements maybe he should make in private. But if you can recall that the ICRAF chief, that is Jeff Nyaga, was forced to resign amid serious allegations that, or this serious allegation of this magnitude that, and of course he cited threats to his life and other, of course, Felix Tshisekedi says that he should have actually said what these threats were. But I think for me, this statement from Felix Tshisekedi comes in the midst of a lot of confrontations between him and President Kagame, and of course his general assessment of what is, you know, the 6 months that the aircraft has had its deployment in the eastern part of DRC.
Right.
Of course, we know in March there was an extension for 3 months, an agreement of a 3 months extension until June. And now at this SADC summit, he goes ahead and says that come June, this aircraft is not forced to, you know, because of course the original mandate of the aircraft was actually just a peacekeeping mandate and not to actually engage in combat. And of course now you see the SADC has actually agreed to send troops. And of course now he says he's no more aligning with the southern part of DRC, of the continent, the SADC, because of you know, the history of good relations with the south as opposed to the, you know, to the East Africa, which again raises a number of questions about DRC's inclusion into the East African community in the first place, because it just recently became the 7th member of the East African community, yet he is actually lambasting and criticizing the general view, which I think is, you know, a modest, and if you ask me, I think this is a plan by the East African community actually to stabilize the region. But here comes again, he tries to cite all these grievances. But I think, for me, I read more.
What do you think are the dynamics behind or this particular situation now that, you know, ICRAF has been there as part of the mission, you know, trying to stabilize that particular part, you know, part of the many other missions in DRC, but with such statements, then where does it leave, you know, the East African community itself, you know, in all the resources that have put to try and make the situation better in Congo?
Actually, it leaves it at a very precarious position. And for me, you ask about the dynamics. The Congo goes into an election in December, and I think these are some of the reasons as to why, of course, for me, in my own point of view, that Felix Tshisekedi is trying to whip some sort of emotions ahead of these elections. And of course, the general assessment could be maybe to do better in the next round of deployment. But for me, I just see some sort of behind the scenes, you know, motives into such accusations. And why do you want to call the SADC mission now? Yet there's already another mission in the East African community. Maybe you just want to extend the mandate to include a combat mandate. But these are some of the questions which I think maybe even Prof could actually look at in terms of assessing the statement that is being made by the DRC president at this very particular juncture.
And that's a good place to ask Prof. So what, from where you see it, how do you assess that particular, you know, statement from the DRC president with regard to the ICRAF mission in Congo, you know, sort of accusing them of working together or just not getting into combat as is expected with the rebels? What do you make of it, Prof?
Thank you very much. Number one, we should not go ahead and just criticize Tshisekedi's position, give it a blanket condemnation without understanding the undercurrents. And there are a lot of undercurrents which have been behind the decision. And this has to do with disagreements amongst the East African force themselves, because the undercurrents include about 6 or 7 positions. Number one, the East African countries who are involved here are emphatic that Kivu region is of great economic value over and above, and they have already invested heavily there, and they do not want to let go. This is something that they don't talk about, but they feel that they have invested and they do not want to let go. Number two, they are also feeling that they will not allow Rwanda to annex Kivu, because Rwanda has an idea of joining the northern and the southern Kivu provinces to create a country. This is something that people are not talking about, but that is the real thing, annexing that region and forming a country. Thirdly, there's the problem that the DRC also ought to recognize that it has an obligation to recognize the Banyamulenge as bona fide citizens. Up to now, the DRC does not recognize the Banyamulenge as bona fide citizens, yet they are in the DRC. These are some of the things, areas of disagreements. Fourth, we also must know that Kivu is a work in progress, and the region itself is actually the richest part of the earth, because this is where we get coltan and some very, very precious minerals which are needed around the world today. So you realize that everybody is going there with self-interest. Fifth, we must also understand that the region is not homogeneous as many people want us to believe. And any attempt to install the Banyamulenge dominance is actually an attempt to subjugate other ethnicities. So these are the points of disagreement, the points of disagreements with the DRC. And of course, the Hutu-Tutsi imperial agenda for the entire East Africa is something that the other countries around are very clear about, and Kivu is actually the melting pot of this. So in a way, they believe that the DRC should forge unity with all its coherent parts, and this be done under the East African Peace Process body. But the DRC has realized that since these countries are themselves having self-interest and they are not involved in combat, this is why they are going into SADC. And I can confirm to you that in the next 1 or 2 months, SADC is going to hit M23 very hard. And this is exactly what DRC wants, because the troops who have been contributed by the East African countries are not doing what the DRC wanted. And this is what SADC now has offered to do. Hit them, and of course, if possible, push them out of the region.
Is that the right way that, you know, at least from where you sit, do you think that's the right move by having SADC go there and actually, you know, actually go into combat with, you know, like the M23 rebels, as opposed to just having, you know, ICRAF was trying to create a buffer? Is that the right move?
Apparently, if you have seen the havoc that is wreaked by M23 and many of these rebels around, then there can be no other way other than to crush them out. There is just no other way, and crushing them is the way to go. And this naturally will offend some of the countries around who are supporting M23. But you see, the area also needs to live in peace. And they cannot live in peace if the rebels are roaming around and creating wrecking havoc on populations.
All right. All right. And now joining us in studio as well is Wilfred Muliro, diplomacy security expert, research fellow at the Global Center for Policy and Research. Thank you so much. Good morning. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Welcome back. As we continue with our conversation, we're trying to get to know the context as well as the situation so far unraveling in the DRC. But also just to get, you know, your comment on what is happening so far. We were speaking about a statement that was made by the Congolese president, Felix Tshisekedi, with regard to the ICRAF mission in Congo. And of course, now that we're going to have SADC deploy the troops in, you know, in Congo, what do you make of this development so far?
Thank you very much. My apologies.
No,
accessing the CBDs difficult from the other side. Okay, I would like to begin from where the speaker ended.
Right.
And I think I want just to mention two things. That the first one, I think the DRC issue does not require the heavy hand of the military. For this reason, that in fact, and number two, before I move ahead, that the entry of SADC will bring a political complex in DRC. It's going to politicize now the process. And it is for this reason that if you look at the behavior of the president of DRC, Tshisekedi, he's looking more at the politics than the sustainable peace in that republic.
Do you read, you know, that the fact that, you know, they're going to the elections, that
yes,
has something to do with that?
Yes, the elections. And it's not so easy, Prof, that M23 can be vanquished by an African mission. Remember, the longest peace mission in the world now by the UN itself and very large in that case. And that's why Zainab, the EAC was on the right path. And I say this because DRC, it's like it has 3 layers of interference. There is the external layer, extra-Africa, not within Africa, which is very strong. That is global powers and US and the rest. Then there's the regional layer, which is now the security complex in the Great Lakes region that is now linking to the Horn of Africa. If you look at the behavior in Sudan, it is the same script that has been carried from the path that we land in DRC is now tested in Sudan, and the security complex will now become huge, the conflict system, Horn of Africa and Great Lakes. And then the third layer is the internal, the state system itself, Shisekedi and the dimensions of which ethnic groups and where are they linked. You know, DRC is a huge state. The more the huge the state, the larger the numbers of neighbors. And when you have many neighbors, just look at Kenya here. We have very small few neighbors, and we have those challenges of communities crossing borders. But this is huge. So many, almost 9 states neighboring. So 2 things happened there. Inter-community movements, we know very well. He was talking about Banyamulenge. That is right. Those are DRC people, but with the links in Rwanda. We have even Maasais with the links in Sudan, Tanzania and the rest there. That dynamic. So he needs, I think, the community, that the sub-region that will understand best. And that's why DRC joined EAC, which is more affected most, is EAC. But if you want to sustain yourself on power, it has happened. Angola helped, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. Actually, they were doing it during the Congo wars that they were called the World War of Africa. You remember that? The first Congo War and the second war, where there were almost 10 states involved in the conflict. And the SADC, southern states, were actually being paid in terms of resources. But we have not had that from the EAC. So when the EAC is almost going to win, all these layers I've told you, we must look at what is this extra Africa hand that does not want peace. Because we were almost seeing it. And then we look at the regional hand that feels like if there is peace in DRC, who will be affected in that case? Then the internal hand that feels if there is peace in DRC, will I win the elections? So that's why there is that dynamic there. And it is very delicate. I think we must begin from the edges. You know, I said somewhere that it is like taking hot soup. You don't begin from the middle, it's very hot, from the edges. The edges are, please talk to Rwanda. Please talk to extra Africa states that have interest there. Then now you can come and now start thinking about the peace spoilers. So far, M23 is not a heavy peace spoiler. When EAC went there, the Kenyan intervention team, actually they were willing and they started retracting.
We know that they did leave some of the key positions within, you know, at least Eastern Kivu area.
Yes.
They did leave some of those positions, and aircraft now had set up missions there.
Yes.
So it was sort of, do you feel like then, you know, aircraft was, you know, creating a position of understanding, sort of? Is that what you want to say?
You got it right, correctly. That is what is happening. Right. So the danger is, let us ask on the edges of the soup, who is this that will be affected by the peace in DRC? And it's clear it has been there. So we have peace spoilers who do not desire peace because the war economy in DRC is benefiting many people. It's a political economy of war. So when you come in to sort it, some people will be poor, others will lose power. So when we look at that one, if you look at ES regional force,
right,
they had 2 tracks of entry. One was military diplomacy, which is a new thing. I think even the UN is looking at that, that, you know, generals and other people, you need peers who are also generals, but not using force, but playing diplomacy, military diplomacy. And then we had the political diplomacy led by the former President Uhuru. A very nice track that, you know, even we are asking for that in Somalia, that why can't we have now a political track? We have a military diplomacy.
Yeah.
And it was working in the sense that for the first time, M23 felt that they had been recognized and they were ready to sit at the table of negotiations. And the joy of EAC, just to close this lineup, was that it was treating all, it was not just focused on M23 the way SADC and Tshisekedi is preaching. There are over 100 armed groups in DRC. And the EAC had gone in with a wide multi-sectoral approach, treating all of them as stakeholders. Let us bring them together.
Right.
So thank you.
No, Dr. Nicodemus, I know you want to add on to that, the issue of using military diplomacy as opposed to combat, trying, going to, war with these armed groups. This is the way that, he says that should be able to work. But at the end of it all, you have the president who feels that, no, we have to go to war in order to achieve the peace that is needed in DRC.
For me, I think just to add my voice onto this, one of the things that I think President Felix Tshisekedi is actually blaming everyone else apart from actually himself. Peace and stability begins with him as the head of state of this great republic. But if you look at his behavior and pronouncements and all that he has been saying, he has always been blaming the rest. In fact, President Kagame always asks, why doesn't he also self-reflect? What has he done as the head of state of DRC in terms of the stability of that particular region? So he has actually been contracting or, contracting these services actually externally. Is it to, we actually saw the Nairobi process. We also, at one point also had the Qatar, the Doha process. At one point now he's also going to SADC. All this adds to these layers my colleague is talking about. And it is actually incumbent upon President Tshisekedi to self-reflect on how the DRC itself, him as the head of state, how can he be able to avert and deal with this before even proceeding externally? And of course, the East African Community Regional Force has actually done a great force. And if you look at the mandate that it was given, and this is a very good mandate, military stroke political, led by a Nairobi process, but with the former head of state of Kenya, and of course with this military, and to the extent that even the general, Jeff Nyaga, has had to even resign, right, amid speculation that his life was in danger. All this shows the nobility or the desire by the East African force, the ICRAF, to actually stabilize the region. Yet, President Tshisekedi does not see this. And for me, as I've said before, I read elections into all this that he's doing. And this is how you whip emotions around an election period where he wants to consolidate his base going to the December election, if at all they happen, because in fact other commentators are reading this instability to be as a result of him wanting to postpone the election. But that story for another day. But if you bring now the SADC combat mission, of which Prof says will actually within few months destroy or deal with M23, which I think is far-fetched in terms of if you're dealing with rebel groups, you know how disorganized, and it's not a regular force where you can go and just remove them. And I think it has to be thought very carefully in terms of the process. And this actually also brings me to the question of these regional rivalries that we are experiencing in the continent. As much as we like these regional economic communities which are building blocks for integration, now there's some sort of competition. Here comes SADC, who want to know how to deploy, but have SADC even actually drawn lessons from the East African regional force in terms of wanting now to do combat. And this again brings that layer of external factors, external actors. Who are these people who are really interested into the war economy, as Muliro is putting it? All right? Tanzania has been bit hesitant in terms of contribution into this ICRAF because of its experiences with the FIB.
Right.
And now you see it was part of the SADC process in Namibia the other day. And again, this brings us to the question of regional interest, global interest, and who is really interested into all this, and the buck stops with President Tshisekedi as the head of state of DRC to weigh these options, to look at how well he can be able to really deal with this particular issue, as opposed to lamenting and, of course, passing the blame all the time to external actors.
All right. I know Prof is waiting to respond to some of those issues that have been raised. Prof, when we're talking about military diplomacy, then the SADC way, according to the other panelists, isn't really the solution to what is happening in DRC.
Yeah, I first agree with Muliro and my colleague on, particularly on the analysis of the layers. The conflict in the DRC is in layers, and we know the external hand is much greater here. And then there's the element of the regional, what you'd call the regional rivalries. But I want to state here now that there is no pat formula on the crisis in the DRC. And rather than blame Tshisekedi, we must also recognize that he is a man under siege. And elections or no elections, the situation in the DRC is not any easy. And it is made worse by the fact that the external actors have got a hand within each of the surrounding countries. So you find each of these countries who are surrounding the DRC are loyal or work with some external players, and this is what complicates the situation there. So even if you leave it to the East African force, it will still not work, because we do know that within the East African force itself, there are nations or countries who have got self-interest and interests which actually are in congruence with that of the external actors. So when I say that there has to be direct involvement, and what I said, I am aware SADC is planning to hit M23. I said I am aware, I know they are going to do it. As to how quickly they will deal with it, I cannot say. And I also would like to warn here that even if they get involved as they intend to, it is just like trying to cut it is a hydra-headed animal. So you'll find that you cut one and another head emerges from somewhere else. So yes, it will take a very long time for Africa basically to deal with these issues, especially bearing in mind that they surround the resources.
All right. And then, Mr. Muliro, you have a humanitarian situation that is worsened by floods that have, killed people in DRC as well as parts of Rwanda as well. And with regard to, the conflict that is already there, what does this mean for the people of DRC who are battling all these things at the same time?
Yeah, and Zainab, it's sad because I just saw, I think, in one of the media that you are praising the people in particular for being resilient in the areas you've mentioned. When the M23 withdrew, we saw people with the hose, and very early in the morning going to plant.
Yeah.
That's extreme resilience. It is something that has been there for long. They have struggled, as my brother here, Minde says. You listen to President Nyerere's speech one time when he was addressing Zimbabwean president. Trying to dissuade them that let us not look at the resources, let us look at the people. He was saying all those people belong to DRC. So let's look at the people, not the resources. In fact, African states should not be paid in terms of resources the way Zimbabwe and Mozambique were doing at that time. So the people, the other day, were they refugees from DRC? who got stranded in Kitale. You know, and we are looking at this, that this is a community of people who should be very rich, but their riches have caused what we don't like. I think Minde and I are Pan-Africanists. We don't like that when you have resources in Africa, then it is a curse. So I'll look at this and say that perhaps as much as we have seen demonstrations, political demonstrations against the MONUSCO, the UN, perhaps the UN should try very hard and focus on the people. And that is what they are doing slightly well, that the humanitarian crisis, nobody is looking at that. We are looking at how can these leaders sit and talk. And I think it's a high time that the UN in particular should focus on the people. Because I think also by virtue of our economies as East Africa community or Africa itself, issues of humanitarian relief are always very mundane. They're expensive for us.
Right.
And the UN is already there. So maybe there should be some form of coordination. I would really need to know how MONUSCO, that has been there for long, is coordinating with the EAC regional force and now SADC or even the AU to deal with matters of the people. Because I believe that the DRC issue needs African leadership. Let Africa lead the peace process in DRC. Maybe even we need the AU coordination. And then the UN should generally focus on the plight of the Congolese people.
Do you think the AU has been able to assert its influence and authority in terms of trying to help the situation there? There have been concerns that the AU has been lame duck, has just been sitting, that it hasn't really asserted its authority and position. What do you think the problem is?
I would say this, that Doc here mentioned, the AU looks at today, and they have that principle, that sub-regional organizations are building blocks for continental unity.
Right.
And even when you look at the mosaic of their African standby force, it's divided in regions. East Africa standby force, North Africa, SADC standby force. The thinking behind that is that if there is a crisis within East Africa, we will first go to EAC as the sub-region of first stop. Just like even the UN has done the same.
Yeah.
If there is a form of intervention in Africa, then we will have to work with the African Union. So the African Union, with its own delicate, the AU is a forum for good relations between African states. It's a Pan-African forum. It neither has political, neither has economic nor security muscle. You look at it as a forum where it gives. It's not. I rarely get into the space of condemning the AU. I always ask myself that what will Africa look like in the international political, geopolitical, strategic bargaining if the AU was not there? Then the idea of external interference and divide and rule would have been worse. But it's a forum. It gives forum for leaders to come there and bargain and have one position as Africa. So again, even in DRC, in its own quiet way, the AU has been, giving the mandate and the push for states. The DRC is very delicate, as I said, many neighbors with different interests. Prof talked about that. Actually, the interests of the neighbors. So you cannot just turn, the cat. You must delicately think about there is Rwanda, there is Burundi, there is Uganda, there is Tanzania.
There are all these dynamics.
All those ones, and they are members of the AU, and the AU is looking at how do we slowly interact, familiarize, and reduce the friction among ourselves as we deal with the external world. And that delicate perspective is never appreciated by the external powers, because that is the objective. And that's why I think SADC should not lend itself to that external perspective that this is Africa, they are always divided and we're moving. Yeah. So I still feel that as much as we talk like that, the AU still looks at, it has given its blessing to East Africa as a sub-regional organization. dealing with the aspects. But where they have gone low, I think it's long time we should operationalize the African Standby Force to a level that we used to have. ECOWAS are very organized, you know, the ECOMOG, the monitoring group is like a military. The EAC is making for the first time an experiment of intervention with the military. EAC was 90% regional economic community. So still you are right that we need that hand of the AU in terms of security direction for this sub-region that is economic, that is now working with security matters.
All right.
Yes.
And I'm going to come back to you, Dr. Minde, in a moment, but we have to take another very quick break here on AM Live. We'll have this conversation in a short while after this break. But talk to us. The hashtag, as always, is AM Live NTV at Zainab Ismail at NTV Kenya. We're back in a few minutes.
God is always engaged in our affairs. He's engaged in your life. He's engaged in the life of our community. He's engaged in the life of our church. He's engaged in the life of our nation.
Pata taarifa teke na e-paper. Stay in the know on the go. Getting the full story bilangori. To sign up, choose your preferred subscription. Use the promo code SUBZ22 to get 20% off and pay. Get your favorite newspaper and enjoy the truth anywhere, anytime. For inquiries, email epaper@ke.nationmedia.com or call 0790 111 111. Subscribe today and get your taarifa teke.
In life, you could be eager to be employed or be self-employed. Either way, you do need the right skills. This is the point where Goodwall is essential to you. Goodwall is a professional social media platform that offers you earning and learning opportunities. It offers you great chances to grow in your career, learn new skills, showcase your existing skills, network with like-minded people, or get job opportunities. Nation Media Group, in partnership with Goodwall, aim at providing solutions to unemployed African youth, creating digital content that inspires young people to stretch themselves and get the right skills that are useful to employers and their peers. So, how can you be part of this? Every month, we'll give you a chance to win $150 through our monthly challenge. Anyone can participate. Just look out for the challenges on NTV Kenya's social media platforms. Join the challenge now.
This week, the trend is jam-packed. Tanzania's Lava Lava and Jaguar talk about unthinkable. Suda!
Okay. Nikona fever, akini na shiva.
Ben Soul will be in the building.
Yeah, I need a healer, come be my dealer.
Motif de Don, the hit-making producer, will be introducing new talent. Kenzo Matata performing live on the trend.
I'm sending you prayer, calling on guidance.
You don't want to miss. All happening this Friday, 10 p.m. only on NTV.
With Molfix pants, changing diapers is now very easy. I tear and take off the used Molfix pants and pull the new one up in a moment. Wrap up the used diaper and throw it away. Come on, mothers, try Molfix baby pants and be part of our happiness movement.
Right, welcome back. You're watching AM Live on NTV as we take a look at the security situation in the DRC, and still sticking to that humanitarian issue situation in that part of, the region, Dr. Minde. When looking at, some of the reports that we're getting, like for example, the Doctors Union, that is the MSF, just on the 9th of May, just 2 days ago, they're reporting that in Goma, within just 2 weeks, more than 670 victims of sexual violence have been treated by the MSF teams in camps for displaced people around Goma. That's the provincial capital of North Kivu in the DRC. This representing 48 new victims per day. And you have then the flooding situation and the landslides that have affected some of the parts there as well. And also the Human Rights Watch, if I can get this, there's also that report by the Human Rights Watch, I believe yesterday, that also mentioned something. Let me get this. And they're saying they're also reporting ethnic targeting in some parts of, DRC. And this is related to the electoral process. But looking at that humanitarian aspect of the whole situation, what do you make of it?
Well, it's just a very unfortunate situation in the eastern part of DRC. It's not just, you've talked about the floods, which is a natural calamity, but of course there's the bigger issue of refugees who are now finding themselves into Tanzania. Of course, Tanzania was reporting that there's been almost 2,000, about 3,000 refugees flocking into the country every month.
Yeah.
Of course, you're talking about sexual violence, and of course the war itself. This, as Muliro has said, these people are, there's a lot of resilience that these people are facing. But again, this actually tells us that war and the region that particular region really needs some sort of humanitarian support,
right,
in terms of international agencies, the United Nations, the African Union. And of course, this is the very reason as to why the DRC actually became a member of the East African community. Because now, with this proximity of Kivu to the center, that is Nairobi and the other East African communities, actually it lends, it brings us an opportunity to actually assist the East Africa, to assist the DRC. We saw, for example, Tanzania really assisting Malawi and Mozambique, who were hit heavily by the cyclones and the floods during that particular time. And for me, I also believe that it is also high time that, other than just offering political military support, that the East African community members and even in their own, by themselves, they can actually offer a lot of support, humanitarian support. Of course, they have done so in terms of hosting these refugees, but I think it is more in terms of offering technical support, offering humanitarian support in terms of food, housing, and all this. And this actually can really go far in helping the DRC at this particular time. Of course, as you have said, it is a huge humanitarian disaster, as pinpointed by various international humanitarian agencies.
Right, indeed, a tough situation. Professor Israel, really not something that, the other members, states of the region can just sit and look at that situation and unravel, but a political solution, but also a humanitarian solution that needs to be found.
Exactly. In fact, the humanitarian crisis is dire, and it calls for a multi-agency intervention, and also the nations around need to come in with support to the communities around. The moment you deal with the humanitarian problem, in many respects you solve the political problems. But when you ignore the humanitarian problem, then the political problem gets worse, and even the military situation now gets out of hand. So there is need for that involvement, and I believe the Eastern African countries who are coalescing around this body, which was headed by retired President Uhuru Kenyatta, need to look more at the humanitarian issue and address also the salient regional rivalries that exist. Then finally, we will be able to now stand against the external influence of players who seem to fan the fire from yes.
All right. I want us to just move a little bit away from that because there's another situation that continues to unravel, and that is in Sudan. I want us to have a look, just quick observations on what is happening in Sudan. It's a complex crisis, this, you know, stemming from that attempted coup by the Rapid Support Military Forces on the 15th of April of this year, and that has now taken, you know, a series of events that have happened, and, you know, that generated quite a huge crisis in Sudan at this point. There have been several attempts for a truce, but then that could not hold. Bona Muliro, when you're looking at that situation that is happening in Sudan, I want to get your assessment, first of all, of what has happened. You have these two military groups that are now engaging in this fighting. Is it a fight for power? Is it a fight for resources? Is it a fight for territory? What do you think is the problem in Sudan?
Thank you very much. I think I had mentioned it. You've sequenced this very well. Right. That DRC.
As that is happening in this part.
Actually, DRC right. was like the classroom. Now they have learned the classroom of those who want to lord over the region for resources. So the path that was taken DRC sustained the bodies that wanted to make resources is easily tested now. Sudan is now easier for them because DRC was a landing place. Yeah. And again, it's just the same layers, just like DRC, the 3 layers, but in Sudan, we are seeing the top layer of external forces stronger than the regional rivalry.
Right.
Sudan has been more outward. You know, the Horn of Africa region is slightly different from the Great Lakes region for one reason, that the Horn of Africa region is the most externally intervened region, the region that has attracted more external interest than any other region. You just look at Somalia, how many external. And so Sudan, with its links being active in the Arab League, and it gives it now this external perspective.
Yeah.
And now we are seeing those issues playing around into the new world order, where we have the US on one side, we have emerging China, and its pocket side player, Russia. And those are issues that are creating threats within that belt. If you look at that belt, it faces, you know, we are looking at Sudan, going down Chad, and you are looking at Egypt, and you are looking at the Middle East. Those are extreme interests of the global powers. The African states have not played so much in that region. And therefore, you look at this and you see there are 2 groups. And one group is almost unorganized, that can be recognized as a legitimate, the military. Then we have another, I would call it rogue group or a mercenary group. And actually for them, it is clearer. The RSF has openly, and I think even they are now organized. It is, we can proudly, maybe, but sorry for that, proudly say that for the first time, we have a private military security company that is African, and that is RSF, because they have been hired to fight wars in Yemen. And I can tell you, Zainab, that it is not far-fetched that they have a relationship with the now private military security company that is driving the world. We call them mercenaries, right. The Wagner. Because the Wagner have been now, you know, I saw somewhere that selling security now, outsourcing security, has become one of the top companies in the US stock exchange. So private military security companies, we are calling them mercenaries. So we have that link. And you can clearly see in Sudan, it is easier for Africa to come in this way, that there are 2 perspectives. One, you know, Africa should ask themselves the question that who among the two is good for the continent, the country, and the region? Is it the one with mercenary links, or is it the one who is filling the vacuum that has been there? Because when you look at Sudan, we are now entering almost a third coup within a coup. It's like a succession of coups, if I may call that. We have the 2019 al-Bashir, and then now we had they called it the civilian, and then they put there the civilian leader and they removed him, and then we are looking at a case where we can say Burhan has been the leader of Sudan, and now we are almost facing another third coup. And therefore, Sudan, again, huge country, although it lost South Sudan, still very huge with many neighbors and the external links in the Arab League. We are seeing Saudi Arabia, Yemen, almost overshadowing the African process. But I would say this, that for Sudan and the people of Sudan, the most neutral arbiter that wishes them well is the African-led arbitration. It should be either the AU or IGAD. Let them subject themselves. They should not go shopping for the Arab League, shopping for the US. The US has a very strong hand, but the issue should be that they should be all this. In fact, the African Union should talk to the US, because we are almost thinking on the same line. The African perspective is that the system that gives some form of legitimacy is the one that we support. And constitutional change of governments is something that is aboard. Although we know that in Sudan, I think they have had 3 civilian governments and 3 or 4 military governments. So they have the people there politically. It has been culturalized that you respect the military general is a political leader.
Is that why it's been so hard to transition power to civilian authority?
Yes, even the civilians themselves, that's right. Even the civilians themselves see like they respect the political leadership of the military than the civilian leadership, because they have been militarized for a long time. Al-Bashir was there for a long time, entrenching these political systems. He created these 2 bulls that are fighting. Burhan and his own external, you know, when you mistrust your own military, you have your own mercenary group that you can use. Now the 2 groups coalesced, removed him, but I heard somewhere people saying we must remove the remnants of al-Bashir. The remnants of al-Bashir are in both groups. It will take a long time, maybe a generation, to remove them. It's just that somebody has been there for long. Like when President Moi was there for 24 years, we have always known that
it's a system
either sides of the team.
It's a system that has its roots deep embedded in the, you know, politics and the economy, all the dynamics surrounding, you know, Sudan. All right, let me hear from Dr. Minde on your take on this whole matter of these 2 gentlemen who are holding Sudan by, you know, the throat. Things seems to have, it seems Sudan is at crossroads at this point.
Well, for me, I read it into 3 different categories, this Sudan conflict. One is a history of dictatorship, long military dictatorship of former head of state Omar al-Bashir. And then number 2 is an unfinished revolution. That is what we are experiencing now. And the third one is actually power play, regional and external power play. And these 3 layers actually are the root causes of this crisis. If you look at the prolonged military regime of the former President al-Bashir, which actually caused a lot of havoc, division, regional factions, and a lot of instability. And of course, in 2019, when we saw the revolution happening, which was a people-led revolution, but I think hijacked by the military, also showcases a situation of an unfinished revolution. And now we see these 2 actors, that is Hamdan and Burhan, who are actually at the center of this power struggle. But again, the third layer, which I think is also very crucial, is the international actors here. It's almost like a Cold War repeat, because we see regional players such as Egypt, Ethiopia, South Sudan, and of course other regional players such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, all have interest in this particular conflict. And then on the other hand, we have these external Western powers, such as Russia with the Wagner Group, which is believed to be working very closely with the RSF. And of course, we see, of course, in these major wars, the United States also has a lot of interest together with Britain, France, and many of these actors. And this actually makes the Sudan conflict very complex. And of course, you have also touched on the issue of humanitarian. Sudan has also faced a number of humanitarian crises as a result of this, what happened in mid-April. Right. Refugees, external instabilities. Yes. We saw these countries actually rescuing their citizens and all that, leaving Sudan into these dire straits. But this, similar to what is happening in DRC, is lack of international attention because of other more serious crises, such as what is happening in Ukraine, for instance. And I think it is up to the international community, through concerted efforts and regional efforts, such as the African Union, having one approach towards resolving this particular crisis. As it is right now, there are so many tracks that have been put in terms of dealing with the Sudan conflict, and all these tracks have different interests, regional interests. My colleague has talked about the Middle East, which also has its interests. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the Arab League, Egypt also has its interest. Now we also see IGAD also trying to resolve. And of course, the South Sudan, of course, has also volunteered to help resolve the crisis. Kenya as well has also volunteered to help this particular crisis. So we have these multiplicities of mechanisms aimed at trying to resolve. But I think it is up to, and this actually makes the situation, it actually increases the volatility of that situation in that particular region. So I think going forward, through the United Nations and other, especially the African Union, can sit down and actually look at ways in which they can be able to really resolve this Sudan conflict by bringing the two generals together. But again, the aim should be a roadmap towards a civilian-led government, which can become the panacea of resolving this particular crisis.
All right, but there are many things that are sort of obstructing that from happening. There was that deal that was struck in December last year. But Prof. Israel, let me get your take on this, and really what you feel, if there was an escalation in the situation in Sudan, what kind of implication or ramifications would that have in Africa?
Thank you very much, Zarem. I want to request you to give me time, because I want to put all this in context.
Okay.
Let us not treat the symptoms. Let us look at the disease.
All right.
The first thing is, what exactly is happening in Sudan? That the current conflict in Sudan is a representation of the theater of absurd cannot be gainsaid. And of course, it's a clash between people who are once friends and foes. So what's behind the fighting? That's the first question. Now, these clashes started around the middle of April, and basically it was between the Burhan and Hemeti, who was basically his deputy. But behind it all, there's the issue of Russia building a naval base on the Red Sea. So the main players here is America and Russia. Before even you talk about the regional players, before you mention Egypt, Libya, Eritrea, Syria, among others, these are actually the main players in this thing. So the key protagonist that we are seeing is General General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is the de facto ruler of Sudan, and General Hamdan Dagalo, who is the leader of the Rapid Support Forces. It should be understood that General al-Fattah was actually the head of the army at the time of al-Bashir. And al-Bashir created Emeti or Dagalo basically as a counter to Al-Fatah. And then, come 2019, the two combined forces and overthrew al-Bashir. So the two, after they overthrew al-Bashir, then entered into an agreement with the civilian or the civil groups, where they agreed that the army would rule for, I think, 21 months, and then the civilian take over for 18 months. But it is after the army's time expired that they decided to do a civilian coup against the civilian government. That is in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it is important to note that this group of Emeti was the Janjaweed. Originally, it was the Janjaweed, which was actually formed and supported by al-Bashir. Again, it is important to recognize that the politics of Sudan has always moved along the Nile. And Emeti comes from the west towards the regions, the Darfur region, which is largely village. And he has positioned himself as, let me use this word, a hustler. So he's talking of fighting for the masses, or a hustler for that matter. And Al-Fatah is positioning himself as working for the good of the country. So all these two guys basically are working in together with Russia, sadly. When you talk about the naval port that Russia plans to build on the Red Sea, it was signed by both, it was signed during al-Bashir's time, and these two guys took it up. On that, they are united. But the United States, when the real America, the US discovered that this thing is going to be constructed, this is when America stepped in. So all this thing is, one, the power sharing deal, and two, the Red Sea port, the naval port that Russia intends to put here. So what are we saying? We are saying that basically it is the Cold War being replayed in Africa. It is actually the US and Russia fighting their issues on African soil. And these other players like Egypt, Syria, and the rest, these are fringe players. So what are the fault lines? The fault lines, which is the bone of contention, is the handing over to civilian rule. And then, of course, the other one is the idea of the stakes. And the stakes is where now Russia, the US, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other powers are battling for influence in the Sudan. My brother Masinde mentioned Wagner. Wagner has actually entrenched itself in many countries in Africa today as we talk. And many of the illegal trade in minerals from West Africa, Central Africa, Sudan, and all over, you'll see the hand of Wagner here. And this, what they get from here is actually used to support the war in Ukraine. So looking at Sudan, even before you talk about the African nations, it is the US and Russia plus their fringe powers around them like China and the rest who are basically playing their game here, with the rest of us being pawns.
So you're saying this is what, a proxy war that is playing in Sudan, but really it is the external actors that are creating that illusion of a war between two, generals here?
Absolutely, absolutely, because you find that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov earlier this year visited Khartoum to finalize the terms of an agreement for the port. And this meeting between Lavrov and Abdel Fattah is what actually angered the Americans, who then also sent the ambassador to Sudan, who warned Sudan that if they action on on the issue of port with Russia, there will be dire consequences. Right. So it's basically external powers fighting in Sudan, but of course localized giving the impression that the issue has to do with the local people or the local populace. It is not.
I think it is something that has been replicated in different parts, Bonamuliro, of different, states in Africa. We've seen what is happening in CAR, now Sudan, DRC. So it appears there is also, a similar trend that we're witnessing.
Yes, you're right. I think Prof is right there in isolating the issues. Actually, when it exploded, at GLOSEPS, we look at the trends, and we focused on Sudan. And around 3 things emerged, including what you're saying. The first thing is there is just background, is what he's saying, we call them coincidences when we looked at them, because at that level we could not allocate blame. The hand of the external powers is not so obvious that you have evidence to say they are doing, even if you know. So we call it a coincidence that how come, as Prof says, al-Bashir had started these negotiations with Russia to have their naval base on the Red Sea. And then when he was out, it is actually Hemedi who has been very active. He went to Moscow, they discussed, and actually before the steps went, this is the first American ambassador resident in Sudan. And look at the trend, 6 months. And the tragedy of US presence and the global friction.
So it's not
so the ambassador gave a warning that there'll be, he didn't explain the consequences if the transition government goes ahead with their deal to have Russia. But you see, many countries, US, Japan, China, they have military bases, including Kenya. Djibouti actually survives on allowing other countries to have military bases. So then the coincidence is that with that warning, it was 3 weeks or 2 weeks to the explosion, is when this transition government, Burhan and Hemedi, had signed, actually had verified and agreed to the agreement that we are only waiting to consolidate. That is where now there was a catch, that we were only waiting to consolidate a legislative arm that can now ratify the entry of Russia to the Red Sea port. And to have that legislative arm, it required now complete transition to civilian. That means you're coming to civilian there. So that process is where the US saw now the loophole to come in and stop that, what they call the nonsense of Russia on the Red Sea. And so those are the coincidences that we saw. So when they went ahead with that, you could see now the transition was stopped. And it is very easy to know that the military coup in Sudan is not endogenous, is not internal. It is driven from outside. What is the reason? There's a lot of
external factors.
Yes. The reason is that after the coup, they have done it even twice. They do not have capacity to manage the state. So they get the state, what else? Because you have just been driven. Because when you look at Egypt itself, Al-Sisi, when he came in, charismatic, it's a coup. But the leader has a vision, he has capacity. But this one here, the two leaders are not charismatic. They do not have capacity to manage the state. That's why they are wobbling. And it is because the interests, as Prof has said, are being driven from outside. And that's why I agree that the solution to Sudan will require a transition to a very strong civilian leader. The two military people we have are, as you observed, they are pawns, these proxy wars. And I just want to add one thing, Zainab, that the trend you have observed is correct. Whether it is Central Republic of Africa, where Wagner is, DRC, Mali, or rest. This is because during the Cold War, it was easier. The international rules were not as civilized. We were not as civilized as now.
All right.
So states could come in openly. You could see that it is actually Russia that has instigated a coup, maybe in DRC. But now what they are doing is that they are using the private military security companies. Actually, at GLOSEPS, we are doing a very long thing on what are the implications of the rise of private military security companies on the security of the region
and
in
this
Africa.
new dynamic
Yeah, we are calling them
really
mercenaries.
shifting everything, right?
Yes, we are calling mercenaries. So states are using them to even instigate coups, to play the, what you're calling proxy wars. Because you know we are now civilized, you cannot just come in a sovereign state. But what do? And that is the danger that Tshisekedi is bringing to the Great Lakes.
All right.
Immediately you invite those mercenaries, you are bringing an arms race within the region, and there will be now external interference and coups will emerge. So your observation is right. Actually, that trend is running across Africa.
All right.
A new form of proxy
quite
wars.
worrying at this point. All right, Dr. Minde, just very quickly as we wind up, your final remarks as well, and perhaps what solutions you feel needs to be addressed.
And one other coincidence that maybe Muliro skipped was actually U.S. Secretary of State's visit to Ethiopia a month just before the coup in April. So actually he was in Ethiopia March 15th, and of course we saw the coup in April 15th. And of course this I don't want to add to what my colleagues have excellently put as the role of external powers. Going forward, I think it is prudent upon Sudan as a nation to actually consolidate and have some a transition to a civilian government, because as it stands, these two heads of state, these two military officials are actually pawns and being used by external factors. And as long as they remain there, and remember, the revolution that was orchestrated was actually a people revolution, standing up against the dictator. And the ultimate desire was actually a transition to a to a civilian-led government. So that could be actually the solution going forward for a more stable Sudan. And of course, with that, it brings stability to the Horn of Africa and Africa as a whole.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Nicodemus Minde, Senior Lecturer, International Relations, USIU Africa, Bwana Alfred Muliro, Diplomacy and Security Expert, also Research Fellow at the Global Center for Policy and Research, as well as Professor Israel Kodiaga was joining us from Uganda via Zoom, Director General for African Affairs at the Global Unification International. I know we've just touched just the tip of the iceberg on some of these issues, but there certainly is a lot to have a discussion on in terms of the conflict in these different parts of Africa. But thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming in this morning, making time for this conversation, and I hope we can have more of such. But you can continue talking to us. The hashtag we're using, as always, is AM Live NTV. Let's continue and engage online with regard to the same. My name is Zenabu Smile, but your world is coming up shortly with Winnie Lubembe as always. Don't go away. Have yourself a good morning and good day.